Venezuela is located at the northern end of South America. It is a roughly triangular area, larger than France and Germany combined. Venezuela is bounded to the north by the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean, to the east by Guyana, to the south by Brazil, and to the southwest and west by Colombia. Its capital is Caracas. Venezuela's development is unique among Latin American countries regarding economic and demographic growth. In the 20th century, it transformed from a relatively poor agrarian society into a rapidly urbanizing one. Before European settlement, Venezuela was inhabited by food-gathering Amerindians dating back to the Upper Paleolithic period. Among the groups that arrived later, the Arawak and Carib were prominent. Nomadic groups engaged in hunting and fishing across the Lake Maracaibo Basin, the Llanos, and the coast, while the most technologically advanced indigenous peoples resided in farming communities in the Andes. These indigenous groups spoke more than 25 different languages, primarily from the Caribbean, Arawakan, and Chibchan linguistic families. During the colonial era, Spain colonized Venezuela. Christopher Columbus arrived in the area now known as Venezuela in 1498, and the first permanent Spanish settlement was established in 1523. In the latter half of the 16th century, Spanish agriculturalists began to colonize the region using grants of land and indigenous laborers. By 1600, more than 20 settlements existed in the Venezuelan Andes and along the Caribbean coast. Venezuela's path to independence involved early attempts and the emergence of key figures. In 1797, Venezuelan Creoles declared an independent republic, though it failed. Francisco de Miranda's 1806 attempt to land on the Venezuelan coast was also unsuccessful. In 1813, Simon Bolívar, a Venezuelan Creole, was appointed commander and faced many challenges against the Spanish. The Republic of Gran Colombia was proclaimed in 1819 with Bolívar as president. On June 24, 1821, his troops won a decisive victory at the Battle of Carabobo, and the remaining royalist forces surrendered in 1823. Venezuela broke away from Gran Colombia in 1829. Venezuela in the 20th and 21st centuries experienced significant political and economic shifts. Until 1935, a succession of military strongmen, known as Andinos, controlled the nation. The discovery of oil attracted foreign investment, making Venezuela the world's leading exporter of oil by 1928. From the late 1940s, Venezuela's economy depended on petroleum production. The government nationalized iron ore, oil, and gas industries in the mid-1970s, funding infrastructure improvements. By the century's end, industries had diversified. Hugo Chavez, elected in 1998, implemented a socialist agenda, increasing nationalization. Mismanagement under Chavez and his successor, Nicolas Maduro, led to declines in oil production and a severe economic downturn when oil prices fell in 2014. Authoritarian practices led to economic sanctions and a humanitarian crisis. In 2023, an agreement was reached for a freer presidential election in 2024. Venezuela is a country on the northern coast of South America, consisting of a continental landmass and many islands and islets in the Caribbean Sea. It comprises an area of 912,050 square kilometers, 352,140 square miles, with a population estimated at 31.3 million in 2024. The capital and largest urban agglomeration is the city of Caracas. The continental territory is bordered on the north by the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean, on the west by Colombia, Brazil on the south, Trinidad and Tobago to the northeast, and on the east by Guyana. Venezuela consists of 23 states, the capital district, and federal dependencies covering Venezuela's offshore islands. Venezuela is among the most urbanized countries in Latin America. The vast majority of Venezuelans live in the cities of the north and in the capital. The territory of Venezuela was colonized by Spain in 1522, amid resistance from indigenous peoples. In 1811, It became one of the first Spanish-American territories to declare independence from the Spanish and to form part of the First Federal Republic of Colombia, Gran Colombia. It separated as a full sovereign country in 1830. During the 19th century, Venezuela suffered political turmoil and autocracy, remaining dominated by regional military dictators until the mid-20th century. From 1958, the country had a series of democratic governments, as an exception where most of the region was ruled by military dictatorships, and the period was characterized by economic prosperity. Economic shocks in the 1980s and 1990s led to major political crises and widespread social unrest, including the deadly Caracazo riots of 1989, 2 attempted coups in 1992, and the impeachment of a president for embezzlement of public funds charges in 1993. The collapse in confidence in the existing parties saw the 1998 Venezuelan presidential election, the catalyst for the Bolivarian Revolution, which began with the 1999 Constituent Assembly, where a new constitution of Venezuela was written and ratified. The government's populist social welfare policies were bolstered by soaring oil prices, temporarily increasing social spending, and reducing economic inequality and poverty in the early years of the regime. However, poverty began to rapidly increase. In the 2010s. The 2013, 2018 and 2024 presidential elections were all widely disputed, with opposition candidates being arrested and/or exiled. This led to widespread protest and international condemnation, which triggered another nationwide crisis that continues to this day. In 2026, the United States captured President Nicolas Maduro. The U.S. announced that it would run the country until a provisional Venezuelan administration was in place. Venezuela is officially a federal presidential republic, but has experienced democratic backsliding into an authoritarian state under the Chavez and Maduro administrations. It ranks poorly on international measurements of freedom of the press, civil liberties, and control of corruption. Venezuela is a developing country, has the world's largest known oil reserves, and has been one of the world's leading exporters of oil. Previously, the country was an underdeveloped exporter of agricultural commodities such as coffee and cocoa, but oil quickly came to dominate exports and government revenues. Venezuela struggles with record hyperinflation, shortages of basic goods, unemployment, poverty, disease, high child mortality, malnutrition, environmental issues, severe crime, and widespread corruption. U.S. sanctions and the seizure of Venezuelan assets overseas have cost the country $24 to $30 billion. These factors have precipitated the Venezuelan refugee crisis, in which more than 7.9 million people had fled the country by May 2025. By 2017, Venezuela was declared to be in default regarding debt payments by credit rating agencies. The crisis in Venezuela has contributed to a rapidly deteriorating human rights situation. Venezuela, country located at the northern end of South America. It occupies a roughly triangular area that is larger than the combined areas of France and Germany. Venezuela is bounded by the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean to the north, Guyana to the east, Brazil to the south, and Colombia to the southwest and west. The national capital, Caracas, is Venezuela's primary center of industry, commerce, education, and tourism. Venezuela administers a number of Caribbean islands and archipelagos, among which are Margarita Island, La Blanquilla, La Tortuga, Los Roques, and Los Monjes. Since the early 19th century, Venezuela has claimed jurisdiction over Guyanese territory west of the Essequibo River, totaling some 53,000 square miles, 137,000 square km, nearly two-thirds of the land area of Guyana. Venezuela also has had a long dispute with Colombia over the delimitation of maritime boundaries in the Gulf of Venezuela and around the archipelago of Los Monjes. A physiographically diverse country, Venezuela incorporates the northern Andean mountain chains and interior highlands, the main portions of the Orinoco River basin with its expansive llanos, plains, Lake Maracaibo, which is the largest lake in South America, and the spectacular Angel Falls, the world's highest waterfall. The republic's development pattern has been unique among Latin American countries in terms of the speed, sequence, and timing of economic and demographic growth. In the 20th century, Venezuela was transformed from a relatively poor agrarian society to a rapidly urbanizing one, a condition made possible by exploiting huge petroleum reserves. These changes, however, were accompanied by imbalances among the country's regions and socio-economic groups, and Venezuela's cities swelled because of a massive and largely uncontrolled migration from rural areas, as well as mass immigration, much of it illegal, from Colombia and other neighbors. Venezuela, like many other Latin American countries, has a high percentage of urban poverty, a massive foreign debt, and widespread governmental patronage and corruption. Venezuela's social and political ills have been compounded by natural disasters such as the floods that devastated sections of Caracas, La Guaira, and other coastal areas in late 1999. On the other hand, from 1958 to the early 21st century, the republic was more democratic and politically stable than most other Latin American nations, and its economy benefited from a thriving petroleum industry that capitalized on the world's largest known oil reserves. Venezuela's position in the world became more precarious during the second decade of the 21st century as a result of the controversial rule of revolutionary leader Hugo Chavez, a significant decline in the fortunes of its petroleum industry, and the increasing authoritarianism of Chavez's successor, Nicolas Maduro. In January 2026, the United States conducted an operation in Caracas to capture Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores. Both had been indicted on drug-related charges. Following the capture, Trump said an unspecified U.S. group would run Venezuela until a transition of power could take place, with particular attention to having American oil companies manage the oil-rich country's struggling nationalized industry. The Venezuelan economy is based primarily on the production and exploitation of petroleum. From the late 1940s to 1970, the country was the world's largest petroleum exporter, and it was long one of the principal exporters of oil to the United States. Venezuela's economy has relied on earnings from the petroleum sector to modernize and diversify other economic sectors. Thus, Sembrando el Petróleo, sowing the oil, has been a national slogan since the 1940s. The development of rich deposits of iron ore, nickel, coal, and bauxite, the ore of aluminum, as well as hydroelectric power, further expanded the economy. During the 1960s, Venezuelan governments stressed import substitution policies, using protective tariffs to limit imports of manufactured goods and subsidies to promote the growth of domestic manufacturing. As a result, export-oriented enterprises expanded. In the mid-1970s, the government nationalized Venezuelan iron ore, oil, and gas industries, and it then used earnings from fossil fuel exports to fund major infrastructure improvements and other public works. By the end of the 20th century, Venezuelan industries had diversified, and the country had developed additional natural resources. Nevertheless, Venezuela's sowing the oil was considerably slowed because of fluctuations in international petroleum prices and global economic recessions in the 1980s and 90s, as well as domestic problems such as inflation, inefficient management, corruption, and a lack of skilled personnel. The economy was pressured by a massive foreign debt, high unemployment, rapid population growth, and illegal immigration. However, early in the 21st century, the economy recovered enough that by 2007 the country had paid off its foreign debt. Press. Hugo Chavez, first elected in 1998, forged a socialist economic and political agenda that included a program of increasing nationalization, which was introduced after his landslide victory in the 2006 election. Determined to reduce U.S. economic influence in Venezuela and the rest of Latin America, he also drew upon the country's oil wealth to grant generous loans to its neighbors. During Chavez's presidency, however, mismanagement contributed to significant declines in oil production and profits. Even as oil exports increasingly dominated the economy and efforts at economic diversification waned, the government failed to adequately invest in the oil industry's maintenance and growth. At the same time, it continued to expand social programs and borrowed heavily. When world oil prices plummeted in 2014, the Venezuelan economy began to free fall. Between 2014 and 2019, GDP declined by some 75%. Authoritarian practices begun by Chavez and intensified by his successor, Nicolas Maduro, worsened the problem by prompting economic sanctions from the United States and other Western democracies. Deep shortages of food and medicine resulted, leading to a humanitarian crisis in Venezuela that grew more desperate when the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 global pandemic reached the country in 2020. Thank you for watching this video.